Is the All-Seeing Eye a symbol of divine omniscience or sinister influence? Today, it usually symbolizes control and domination by a shadowy elite, but what was its original use? We'll explore this and more in today's episode of Total View. On the show today, I have David joining me, who's a contributor to The Conscious Reporter. I wanted to bring him on the show today to discuss his article, The All-Seeing Eye, Sacred Origins of a Hijacked Symbol. David, hello, welcome to Total View.
Hi Jenny, thanks for having me along. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So David, what is the symbol of the All-Seeing Eye? What does it mean and how has this symbol been hijacked?
So the symbol of the All-Seeing Eye is from very ancient times, and it meant, or it symbolised, a divine overseer benevolently overlooking creation and taking care and protecting it. And it also symbolised the spiritual part within, so namely the third eye, which a person can develop within themselves and develop spiritual insight. So it very much represented a positive thing, both external and internal. But in more recent times, in modern times, it's become synonymous with being under surveillance and of a elitist control that appears to be increasingly coming into place across the world. But that's an inversion of what it originally stood for.
Right. What are the origins of this symbol? What ancient cultures used it? And what did it mean to them?
There's various ancient cultures that it arose in. So, for example, in Hinduism, there was the Eye of Shiva, and commonly it was referred to as being like an eye in heaven, or the sun in the sky, symbolically representing the eye of Shiva, or a deity overlooking creation. And so typically statues of Shiva will show him with the normal eyes, but also an eye or a dot in the midbrow there, where it's said that the third eye resides. Then we have a very similar symbology in Buddhism with the eyes of Buddha, also referred to as the eyes of the world. And on Buddhist temples, typically they will paint on the eyes of Buddha as a symbol of protection. And also, as we know, it's quite common for statues of Buddha to also have the dot where the midbrow is, where the third eye is, to symbolically represent that. And then it's also in ancient Egypt with the Eye of Horus. So that's probably the most commonly recognised one around the world these days. And again, it's a symbol of the sun god Horus. So again, using that symbology of the sun being like an eye of a soul, a deity overlooking creation.
That one's really interesting, how it resembles the pineal gland within the brain.
Yeah, so when you look at pictures of a cross-section of the brain, and then you look at a picture of the Eye of Horus, as the ancient Egyptians drew it, it looks like the Eye of Horus is mapping out the cross-section of the brain, where the pineal gland is, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the brainstem. All those different lines are represented in the Eye of Horus, which match up with the cross-section of the brain. So, it would suggest that perhaps the ancient Egyptians were aware of how the anatomy looked inside the brain, and that they regarded it as being a spiritual centre within a person. And it's quite common for people to regard the seat of consciousness as being in the midbrain there, and particularly with the pineal gland, and with the pineal gland being very much being like an eye in its physical structure, and in that way perhaps suggestive of the fact that it is regarded as a spiritual centre within a person, and a centre of spiritual insight which a person can develop through practices like meditation. So it seems like, perhaps the ancient Egyptians were aware of all of that and practiced that, and that's why they had this Eye of Horus symbol.
Yeah, it's really intriguing, really interesting. What other cultures had the symbol of the All-Seeing Eye? So
there's other examples of it, for instance, in the form of the Hamsa in the Middle East. So the Hamsa being like an eye drawn on the palm of a hand. And that was more of a protective symbol to deflect what is referred to as the evil eye, which isn't so much a physical eye, but rather someone else's malintent towards someone else. So it's used as a symbol of protection to deflect back and stop that intended bad luck against a person. In a similar way, in Greece and Turkey, they have a similar symbol called the nazar, which is just an eye symbol typically made out of blue glass. And again, that's to deflect and undo any undue influence from the so-called evil eye. And there's also examples of it in ancient Aztec and Mayan artworks, and also in ancient Native American artworks, where it's not so well known exactly how they interpret it. In other parts of the world, we also have the All-Seeing Eye appearing in the Christian iconography, first appearing in the 16th century in artwork, and in the 17th century or 18th century in the facades of different cathedrals around Europe. And given that it was the Masons building these buildings, perhaps the symbol already existed in Freemasonry and they started to place it on the buildings. Although it's not until the late 18th century that Freemasonry publicly started using the All-Seeing Eye symbol. And so then we see it appearing in the Great Seal of America. So the Great Seal was designed in the late 18th century also, and then in the early 20th century it appears on the American $1 bill, as is commonly known. And going from there, in more modern times, it starts to appear in the corporate world and different corporate logos and incorporating different variations on the theme of the All-Seeing Eye, and also in different government agency logos. And it's in this where it starts to take on more of an elite control connotation to it. So that's where we see it would appear to start to being hijacked, as we say.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting to learn about the origins and how the symbol has really transcended time and cultures. Why did you choose to write about this issue? Why do you care about it, and why should others care about it and pay attention?
Well, I looked into it and found that there was such a rich positive history of the use of the symbol from ancient times that it was sad to me that, in modern times, most people interpret it with the negative connotation of the surveillance state. So I felt it was important to get the message out there that actually this was originally a positive symbol, and that given that, perhaps we should reclaim it back for the good by using it in a positive context.
Right on. That kind of leads me to the last question. Is there anything that we can do, that people can do to stop or counter the hijacking of the symbol?
Yeah, well, just being aware of the true history of the symbol, and if we can start using the symbol ourselves in a positive context, we can then give the symbol back that power to counteract the negativity and darkness that has taken it over. So whereas in the past it represented the eye of God or a spiritual part within, these days with the Illuminati and elite control, it's more associated with being the eye of Lucifer, which we get more into in the second article.
Yes, you've alluded to it in your article. What else are you going to cover in there?
Yeah, so we'll cover more of the recent history of the use of the eye in corporations and on the dollar bill and government agencies, and then through to, modern pop culture with different celebrities and fashion shoots and movies, and it's become quite a ubiquitous symbol in modern pop culture, even appearing in the Sydney fireworks display last year and appearing in Super Bowl halftime shows and even in the 2012 London Olympics. So I'll be running through all of that recent history of the use of the All-Seeing Eye and just showing how it does seem to point to this elitist control, which seems to want to be trying to come in more and more in these times.
Well, looking forward to that. Thank you so much, David, for coming onto the show, explaining all of this and your work into this issue, bringing to light what the sacred origins of the symbol is and how it's been hijacked. So thanks so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Jenny. Thanks for having me on.
And if you want to learn more about this issue, just go to consciousreporter.com and check out his article. That's it for me.